Claire and I had built a life I was proud of. 16 years of marriage, 2 beautiful kids, a home filled with the kind of love and chaos that made life worth living. Or at least, I thought we had. Looking back now, I can see the cracks that were always there, hidden beneath the surface. But when you're living in the moment, you don't see the flaws. You only see what you want to see. Our daughter Ella had just started 5th grade at a private school Claire had insisted on. It was one of those schools with ivy-covered walls and classrooms filled with kids whose parents drove cars that cost more than our house. "It'll be good for her," Claire had said when we toured the campus. "A better education. More opportunities." I didn't argue. Claire had always been the planner, the one with the big ideas. I was content to let her lead, trusting that she had our family's best interests at heart. But it wasn't just Ella who had taken to the new school. Claire had thrown herself into the community, volunteering for fundraisers, joining committees, and spending hours on the phone with other parents. At first, I thought it was great. She seemed happy, engaged, full of purpose. But then the late night started. "There's a meeting at the school," she'd say, slipping into her coat as I sat down to dinner with the kids. Or, "I promised I'd help organize the book fair. Don't wait up." I told myself it was nothing. Claire was busy, that's all. But the feeling in my gut told me otherwise. The first clue came from Ella. "Mr. James is funny," she said one evening as we sat at the dinner table. "He told us today that the apostrophe is the most misunderstood piece of punctuation." "Mr. James?" I asked, taking a bite of my pasta. "Yeah," Ella said, grinning. "My English teacher. Mom says he's super smart." I raised an eyebrow, glancing at Claire. She was looking down at her plate, her cheeks faintly pink. "Mr. James teaches English?" I asked. "I thought her teacher was Ms. Harper." "Ms. Harper left," Claire said quickly, not looking up. "Mr. James took over this semester." I thought I mentioned it. She hadn't, and something about the way she avoided my eyes set off alarm bells in my head. It wasn't until a week later that the real crack appeared. I was picking Ella up from school when one of the other parents, a woman named Rachel, approached me. She was the type who always had something to say, her gossip delivered with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Hi, Liam," she said, adjusting the strap of her designer purse. "How's Claire?" "She's good," I said, glancing at Ella, who was chatting with her friends near the car. "Busy with school stuff as usual." Rachel nodded, her smile widening. "She's been spending a lot of time here, hasn't she? Especially with Mr. James." The way she said it, with a lilt in her voice and a glint in her eye, made my stomach turn. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "Oh, nothing," Rachel said, waving a perfectly manicured hand. "It's just, well, they seem close. I've seen them talking after school a lot, that's all." She gave me a little wink before walking away, leaving me standing there, my mind racing. When I got home, I couldn't shake Rachel's words. Claire was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, her hair falling in loose waves over her shoulders. She looked so normal, like the woman I'd known for 16 years. But as I watched her, I couldn't stop the doubt from creeping in. "Ella mentioned Mr. James today," I said casually, leaning against the counter. "She says you've been helping out a lot at school." Claire glanced up, her expression neutral. "Just a few things here and there," she said. "You know how it is." "Do you like him?" I asked. "Mr. James?" Her hands faltered for a fraction of a second, the knife slipping on the cutting board. She recovered quickly, her smile returning. "He's fine," she said, shrugging. "Why?" "No reason," I said, studying her closely. But the seed had been planted, and I couldn't ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. The night I found the text was like any other. Claire had gone to bed early, claiming a headache, while I stayed up watching TV. Her phone was on the coffee table, buzzing softly with notifications. I picked it up out of habit, intending to silence it, but then I saw the name on the screen. Mr. James. The message preview read, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Last night was amazing." My blood ran cold. My hand shook as I unlocked her phone, something I'd never done before but didn't hesitate to do now. The messages were all there, laid out in front of me like a confession. Flirty texts, intimate jokes, and plans for meetings I hadn't known about. You make me feel alive again. We have to be careful. He's starting to ask questions. I haven't felt this way in years. I dropped the phone, my chest tightening as the room spun around me. Claire, the woman I loved, the woman I trusted, was having an affair with our daughter's English teacher. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat in the living room, Claire's phone still lying on the coffee table where I had dropped it. It screened dark now, but the messages burned into my memory. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Disbelief, anger, humiliation. How could she do this? How long had it been going on? And how many times had I unknowingly smiled at the man who was destroying my family? When the first light of dawn began to creep through the blinds, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to let this fester. Claire owed me answers. She came downstairs just after 7, still in her robe, her hair messy from sleep. For a brief moment, she looked like the Claire I had loved for 16 years, the woman who used to steal sips from my coffee cup and laugh when I pretended to be annoyed. But then her eyes landed on the phone, and her expression shifted. Her lips parted, just slightly, and she hesitated mid-step. "Morning," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "Morning," she replied cautiously, moving toward the coffee maker. Her movements were slower than usual, her shoulders tense. She poured herself a mug, but she didn't take a sip. Instead, she turned to face me, her eyes flicking toward the phone. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I said. "You left your phone down here last night." Her fingers tightened around the handle of her mug. "Oh," she said, her voice light but forced. "Thanks." I stood, my chair scraping against the floor, and she flinched at the sound. "Who is he?" I asked, my tone steady but sharp. "Ryan. Or should I say Mr. James?" Her face went pale. "Liam, Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't lie to me. I saw the messages, Claire." "I know." For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for the right words. Finally, she set her mug down on the counter and crossed her arms over her chest. "It's not what you think," she said softly. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "Not what I think." "Really?" "Because what I think is that my wife has been sneaking around with our daughter's teacher. What I think is that every late night, every work dinner, every goddamn excuse you've made for months has been a lie." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel any sympathy. "Not yet. It wasn't supposed to happen," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for it to get this far." I slammed my hand down on the counter, making her jump. "Stop saying that. Affairs don't just happen, Claire. You don't trip and fall into another man's bed. You made a choice." Her tears spilled over, and she wiped them away angrily. "You don't understand," she said. "I've been so unhappy, Liam. I've felt invisible for years, like I'm just here to keep the house running and the kids on track. And Ryan, he saw me. He made me feel alive again." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "So this is my fault?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You're unhappy, so you cheat? You don't think to talk to me, to tell me how you're feeling. You just run to the first guy who looks at you." "It wasn't like that," she said, shaking her head. "It started as just talking. I didn't mean for it to go any further." "But it did," I said, my anger bubbling to the surface again. "Didn't it? How far, Claire? How far did it go?" She hesitated, her eyes darting away from mine. That hesitation was all the answer I needed. "I can't believe this," I said, running a hand through my hair. "You know, I've spent the last 16 years thinking I was the luckiest guy in the world. I thought we were solid, Claire. I thought what we had was real. But I guess I was just a goddamn fool." Her sobs grew louder, and she reached for me, but I stepped back, holding up a hand to stop her. "Don't," I said coldly. "Don't you dare try to comfort me right now." "Liam, please," she said. "I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you." "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly. "Because you did. You've destroyed everything." The kids came downstairs then, their footsteps thundering on the stairs. Ella ran into the kitchen, still in her pajamas, her face lighting up when she saw us. "Morning," she chirped, grabbing a bowl from the cupboard. Are we having pancakes? Claire wiped her face quickly, plastering on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Not today, sweetheart, she said. We're in a bit of a rush. I stared at her, my jaw tightening. She was already slipping into damage control mode, pretending everything was fine for the kids' sake. And as much as I wanted to call her out, I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not in front of them. After breakfast, I told Claire we needed to talk later. She nodded silently, her eyes red and swollen, and left for the day. I watched her go, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a stone. Part of me wanted to kick her out, to tell her to pack her things and never come back. But another part, the part that still remembered the good times, the love we'd once shared, wasn't ready to let go. I spent the rest of the day going through the motions. I took Ella to her piano lesson, helped Ben with his homework, and cooked dinner, all while trying to ignore the storm raging inside me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, heard her voice, felt the sting of her betrayal all over again. When Claire came home that evening, she looked like she'd aged 10 years in a single day. She stood in the doorway, her hands clenched into fists, and met my eyes. I'm ready to talk, she said. The kids were upstairs by the time, Claire, and I sat down in the living room. The silence between us was heavy, charged with unspoken words. She perched on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while I sat opposite her in the armchair, arms crossed, staring at the floor. Start talking, I said finally, my voice colder than I intended. I want to know everything. Claire took a shaky breath, her fingers twisting together. It started last semester, she began. When Ella moved into Mr. James's class, I'd see him at parent-teacher meetings, school events, and we just started talking. Talking, I repeated bitterly. Funny how that seems to be the starting point for every affair. She winced but continued. At first, it was nothing, just casual conversations about school, about the kids. But then, I don't know, we started texting. He'd tell me I was funny, or smart, or beautiful. And I guess I liked the attention. My jaw tightened as I fought to keep my anger in check. So what? I wasn't giving you enough attention? Is that your excuse? No, she said quickly, her voice cracking. It wasn't like that. It's just, he made me feel like I mattered again. Like I was more than just a wife and a mother. And sleeping with him? I asked sharply. Did that make you feel important too? Her face crumpled, and she buried it in her hands. I didn't mean for it to go that far, she whispered. I swear, Liam, it was a mistake. A mistake? I repeated, my voice rising. A mistake is spilling coffee on your shirt, Claire. This was a choice. A deliberate, calculated choice. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman I'd loved for 16 years with the person sitting in front of me. The person who had lied to me, betrayed me, and risked everything we'd built for the sake of a cheap thrill. How long? I asked finally. How long has it been going on? She hesitated, her lips trembling. A few months, she admitted. Since the spring fundraiser. I closed my eyes, the timeline clicking into place. The late nights, the sudden interest in school events, the endless excuses, they all made sense now. Does he know about me? I asked. About the kids? Yes, she said softly. He knows everything. The casual way she said it made my blood boil. So you've been parading our family around for him to judge? For him to laugh at behind my back? No, she said, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't like that. He never wanted to hurt you. Don't, I said, standing abruptly. Don't you dare try to defend him to me. I paced the room, running a hand through my hair as I tried to process what she just told me. Do you love him? I asked, the words catching in my throat. She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I found my answer. It's not about love, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. It was never about love. That's not an answer, I snapped, turning to face her. Do you love him? Her shoulders slumped, and she shook her head. No, she said softly. I don't. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But the doubt was already there, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Then why? I asked, my voice breaking. Why risk everything for someone you don't even love? She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. Because I felt like I'd lost myself, she said. Somewhere along the way, between the kids and the house and everything, I stopped being me, and I didn't know how to find my way back. Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to throw her excuses back in her face. But another part, the part that still remembered the woman I fell in love with, felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. Was it sympathy? Pity? Or just the aching realization that she wasn't the only one who had gotten lost? I gave you everything, I said finally, my voice quiet but filled with pain. I worked my ass off to give you this life, to give you a family, a home, a partner you could count on. And this is how you repay me? Her sobs grew louder, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I didn't have it in me. Do you even want to fix this? I asked, my voice hollow. Or are you just sorry you got caught? I want to fix it, she said quickly, her words tumbling over each other. I'll do whatever it takes, Liam. Therapy, counseling, anything. I'll cut off all contact with Ryan. Please, just give me a chance. I stared at her, my mind racing. Could I forgive her? Could I ever look at her without seeing him? Without wondering if she was still lying to me? The doubts were already there, creeping into every corner of my thoughts. I don't know, I said finally, the words heavy on my tongue. I don't know if I can do this, Claire. Her face crumpled, and she buried it in her hands again, her sobs muffled by her palms. I turned away, unable to watch her fall apart. I needed space. I needed time to think, to figure out what the hell I was going to do. I'm going for a walk, I said, grabbing my coat. Don't wait up. Liam, please, she said, standing, but I held up a hand to stop her. Just don't, I said, my voice cracking. Not right now. The air outside was cold, biting at my skin as I walked aimlessly through the neighborhood. The houses around me were quiet, their windows glowing softly with the warmth of families who still had their shit together. Families who didn't know what it felt like to have their world ripped apart. I didn't know how long I walked or where I went. By the time I got home, the house was dark, and Claire was asleep on the couch, her face streaked with dried tears. I stood there for a moment, staring at her, trying to remember the last time I'd seen her look so small, so broken. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the first flicker of something other than anger. I wasn't ready to forgive her. I didn't know if I ever would be. But as I stood there, watching her sleep, I realized that I wasn't ready to give up either. Not yet. The morning after the confrontation, the house was eerily quiet. Claire was in the kitchen when I came downstairs, her face pale and drawn. She hadn't changed out of her clothes from the night before, and there were dark circles under her eyes, the telltale signs of a sleepless night. She looked at me as I entered, her lips parting as if to speak, but I walked past her without a word. Liam, she said softly, but I ignored her, pouring myself a cup of coffee and heading to the backyard. I needed air, space to think, to breathe. Sitting on the porch, I stared out at the empty yard. The swing set I'd built when Ella was 3 stood unused. Its bright colors faded from years of sun and rain. I thought about the countless Saturdays I'd spent out here, grilling burgers while the kids ran around laughing, Claire's voice calling out from the kitchen. It felt like another life. A life that was slipping further out of reach with every passing moment. The kids came downstairs not long after. Ella bounded into the kitchen, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her face bright with excitement. "Morning, Dad," she chirped, grabbing an apple from the counter. "Morning, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. Ben followed a few minutes later, his headphones slung around his neck, his usual teenage scowl in place. He muttered a greeting before heading straight for the fridge. Claire moved around the kitchen, preparing breakfast and lunches like everything was normal, but I could see the tension in her movements. She avoided my eyes, her voice overly cheerful as she spoke to the kids. If they noticed anything was off, they didn't say anything. When they left for school, the silence that followed was deafening. "I'm sorry," Claire said, breaking the quiet. Her voice was soft, tentative, as if she were afraid to say the words too loudly. For everything. I didn't respond right away. I stared down at my coffee, the steam curling into the cool morning air. Finally, I looked up at her. I don't know what you expect me to say. She flinched, but she didn't look away. I don't expect anything, she said, but I meant what I said last night. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, Liam. I'll prove to you that I'm worth trusting again. Trusting you, I said bitterly, setting my mug down with more force than necessary. You didn't just break my trust, Claire. You destroyed it. And I don't know if it can be fixed. Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. I understand, she said, but I'm not giving up. I love you, Liam. I love our family. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving it to you if that's what it takes. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But the doubt was still there, gnawing at the edges of my mind. That day at work, I went through the motions, grading papers and teaching lessons without really being present. My colleagues noticed my distraction, but no one said anything. By the time the final bell rang, I was exhausted, drained in a way I hadn't been in years. I stopped by the coffee shop on my way home, hoping the caffeine would keep me going long enough to get through dinner with the kids. As I waited in line, I saw Rachel, the parent from Ella's school who had dropped the first hint about Claire and Ryan. She spotted me and waved, her smile wide as she walked over. Liam, she said, her voice dripping with fake cheer. How are you holding up? I stared at her, my jaw tightening. What do you mean? Her smile faltered slightly, and she tilted her head, feigning innocence. Oh, nothing, she said. I just thought, well, with everything going on at the school, it must be a lot to deal with. I narrowed my eyes. Everything going on? Her eyes darted around the room, as if checking to see who might be listening. You know, she said, lowering her voice, the rumors about Claire and Mr. James. People have been talking for weeks. My stomach churned. Weeks? I repeated, my voice flat. She nodded, her expression smug. I thought you knew. I mean, it's been pretty obvious, don't you think? I didn't respond. I couldn't. The humiliation burned in my chest, and I turned away from her, abandoning the line as I pushed out the door. The cold air hit me like a slap, but it did nothing to ease the ache in my chest. By the time I got home, Claire was sitting in the living room, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes searching mine. Did you know people were talking about you? I asked, my voice sharp. About you and Ryan? Her face crumpled, and she buried it in her hands. I'm so sorry, Liam, she said. I didn't think. No, you didn't think, I snapped, cutting her off. You didn't think about how this would affect me, or the kids, or our family. You just thought about yourself. Her sobs filled the room, but I didn't stop. Do you have any idea what it feels like to be the last one to know? To have strangers pitying me because my wife is sneaking around behind my back? I'll fix it, she said, her voice breaking. I'll do whatever it takes. Please, Liam, just give me a chance. I stared at her, my chest tight with anger and hurt. Part of me wanted to believe her, to give her that chance. But another part, the part that still felt the sting of her betrayal, wasn't sure I could. I need time, I said finally, my voice quiet. I can't do this right now. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and I turned away, heading upstairs to the guest room. As I closed the door behind me, I realized I didn't know how long it would take, or if time would be enough to fix what she had broken. The guest room was cold and unfamiliar, even though I'd spent countless weekends in there painting the walls and putting up shelves. It had always been a place for guests or storage, not for me. But that night, as I lay on the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling, it felt like the only place I belonged. I barely slept. My mind replayed everything Claire had said, over and over, until the words lost their meaning and became noise. I thought about Ella and Ben, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around them. I thought about Ryan, this faceless man who had somehow wormed his way into my family. Most of all, I thought about Claire, the woman I'd promised to love forever, even when forever felt impossible. The next morning, Claire was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs. She glanced up as I entered, her face pale and tired. "Coffee?" she asked softly, holding up the pot. "No," I said shortly, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. I could feel her eyes on me as I leaned against the counter, drinking in silence. "I thought we could talk more," she said after a moment, her voice tentative. "Not now," I said, my tone flat. "The kids will be up soon." She nodded, looking down at her hands. "Liam, Not now," I repeated, cutting her off. The words came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't apologize. I didn't have the energy to make her feel better. By the time the kids came downstairs, I'd managed to plaster a smile on my face, pretending everything was fine. Ben grunted a greeting before grabbing his cereal, while Ella chatted happily about her plans for the day. Claire played along, asking questions and laughing at the right moments, but her eyes kept flicking toward me, searching for something I wasn't ready to give. I left for work earlier than usual, needing to escape the suffocating weight of the house. The drive was a blur, my thoughts a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and confusion. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, I was already exhausted. The day dragged on. My students noticed my distraction, their questions met with half-hearted answers. During my lunch break, I sat alone in the staff room, staring at my untouched sandwich. A few colleagues tried to make conversation, but I brushed them off, retreating to my classroom to grade papers I couldn't focus on. It wasn't until the end of the day that I finally checked my phone. There were 2 missed calls from Claire and a text that read, "We need to talk tonight. Please." I didn't respond. When I got home, the house was quiet. Claire was in the living room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Liam," she said softly, "can we talk now?" I hesitated, the urge to keep walking warring with the weight of her gaze. Finally, I sighed and sat down across from her. "Fine," I said. "Talk." She took a shaky breath, her hands twisting together. "I know I hurt you," she began, her voice trembling. "I know I've destroyed your trust, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I need you to know that I'm committed to fixing this. To fixing us." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The words felt hollow, no matter how much she meant them. "I'll do whatever it takes," she continued. "Therapy, counseling, anything. I'll quit the school committees. I'll cut Ryan out of my life completely. Just, please, Liam, don't give up on us." Her voice broke on the last word, and she looked at me, her eyes pleading. For a moment, I almost softened. Almost. But the memory of those texts of her lies was still too fresh. "I don't know if I can do this, Claire," I said finally, my voice low. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at you and not see him." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she nodded. "I understand," she said. "But please, don't make any decisions right now. Just think about it." That night, I went for a drive. The streets were quiet, the lights from passing cars streaking across the windshield. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just needed to get away, to clear my head. I ended up at the park near our house, the one where we used to take the kids when they were younger. The swings creaked softly in the breeze, the faint sound stirring a memory of Ella laughing as Claire pushed her higher and higher. I sat on a bench, staring out at the empty playground. My chest ached with the weight of everything I'd lost, or was about to lose. I thought about Claire's words, about her promises to fix what she'd broken. I thought about the life we'd built together, the good times and the bad. And I thought about whether any of it was worth saving. When I got home, Claire was asleep on the couch, her face streaked with dried tears. I stood in the doorway, watching her for a long time. She looked so small, so fragile, like a shadow of the woman I'd married. For the first time in days, I felt something other than anger. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a flicker of something close to understanding. Claire had made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but she wasn't the only one who had gotten lost along the way. I wasn't ready to make a decision, but I knew one thing. I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. The days after my late-night drive were quiet. Claire stayed out of my way, her presence muted in the house. She still cooked dinner, folded laundry, and packed the kids' lunches, but the usual energy she carried was gone. It was as if she was afraid to take up space, to remind me of the betrayal that lingered between us. I didn't know what to do. Every time I looked at her, I felt the sting of her lies, the weight of her choices pressing down on me. And yet, there was still a part of me that remembered the good, the laughter, the partnership, the life we'd built together. That part of me wanted to believe her, to give her the chance she was begging for. But forgiveness felt like an impossible mountain to climb. Claire suggested therapy the following week. She brought it up cautiously, her voice hesitant, as if expecting me to shut her down. "I found a counselor," she said one evening after the kids had gone to bed. She was sitting across from me in the living room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Her name is Dr. Mercer. She specializes in couples dealing with infidelity." I didn't respond right away. I stared at the coffee table, my jaw tightening as I thought about the vulnerability it would take to sit in a room and air our pain to a stranger. It felt overwhelming. But then I thought about Ella and Ben, about the life we'd built, and I nodded. "Set it up," I said finally, my voice flat. Claire's shoulders sagged in relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Liam." Our first session was brutal. Dr. Mercer, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, didn't waste any time. She asked pointed questions, digging into the roots of our relationship and forcing us to confront the cracks we'd ignored for years. "Why did you feel the need to seek attention outside your marriage?" she asked Claire during our second session. Claire's hands trembled in her lap. "I felt invisible," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, like I was just going through the motions. Liam was always so focused on work, on providing for us, that I felt like I didn't matter anymore. Her words stung, but Dr. Mercer didn't let her off the hook. "And you thought having an affair would solve that?" "No," Claire said quickly, shaking her head. "I know it was wrong. I know I hurt Liam, and I hate myself for it. But at the time, I wasn't thinking about the consequences. I was selfish." Dr. Mercer turned to me. "Liam, how does hearing that make you feel?" I hesitated, the words tangled in my throat. "Angry," I said finally, "and hurt, like I wasn't enough for her." Over the next few weeks, the sessions became a space where we could say the things we'd been holding back. Claire admitted to the depth of her guilt, the ways she'd lied to herself to justify her actions. I admitted to the ways I'd withdrawn from her over the years, focusing so much on work and the kids that I'd let our relationship drift. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I wanted to walk out, when the pain felt too raw to keep going. But each time, I stayed. Not for Claire, but for myself. For the chance to find clarity, whether that meant rebuilding or letting go. One evening, after a particularly emotional session, Claire approached me in the kitchen. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. I nodded, setting down the mug I'd been rinsing. She leaned against the counter, her arms crossed over her chest. "I know I've said this before, but I need you to hear me," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry, Liam, for everything. For the lies, the betrayal, for breaking your trust. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm committed to earning it, no matter how long it takes." I stared at her, my emotions swirling. Her sincerity was undeniable, but so was the hurt that lingered in my chest. "I appreciate that," I said finally. "But this isn't just about what you want, Claire. It's about what I need. And right now, I'm still figuring out what that is." The turning point came 2 months later. We were at the park, watching Ella and Ben kick a soccer ball around. Claire and I sat on a bench, the air between us less tense than it had been in weeks. "I've been thinking," I said, breaking the silence. "About us. About everything." She looked at me, her eyes wary but hopeful. And I think, I want to try," I said. "For the kids. For us. But this isn't going to be easy, Claire. It's going to take time, and it's going to take work." Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks as she nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you, Liam. Thank you." It's been 6 months since that day. Therapy has become a regular part of our lives, a space where we continue to work through the pain and rebuild the trust that was shattered. Some days are harder than others. There are still moments when I catch her looking at her phone and feel a pang of suspicion, moments when the memory of Ryan's messages creeps into my mind. But there are also moments of hope, of laughter, of connection, of the life we're trying to rebuild. I don't know what the future holds for us. I don't know if we'll ever be the same as we were before. But I've learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing to move forward, one step at a time. And for now, that's enough.